Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about cheaper versions of expensive headphones. And I want to preface this real quick by saying that while I think the cheaper versions offer a pretty close experience to what the full-priced version does, I don't think in any of these cases the cheaper version sounds better than the full-priced version does. And if you have the money, I do recommend getting the better version. I think we're getting a better product and a better sound. But if you're on a tight budget, I think this can help you kind of get the same sound signature at a reduced cost. Although some of them are pretty cheap and some are still pretty expensive, just not as expensive as the more expensive counterpart. So we're going to start off this list with a pretty easy one, which is going to be the 660S and the 58X. So the 660S is consistently between $400 and $500, and the 58X is pretty much at, I think, $150 or $160 pretty much all the time. And you can see the back is removed and the headband's different. It's for a different product. But anyways, this represents the 58X. And to be honest, another reason why this one is first on this list is because I think these are the most similar of all the headphones I'm going to talk about today. And I would actually consider the 58X to be about 95% of what the 660S is. The 58X is awesome. It's an amazing bang for your buck headphone. I do feel like the 660S edges it out. So what you're sacrificing with the 58X is a little bit of soundstage width and kind of a crispiness to the top end. You get a little bit more finite treble response on here, but the forwardness of everything, the bass response between the two, to me is just about identical. The vocal presentation is just about the same, and that's a good thing because that's primarily what this is good at, although this has a little bit more, again, finite treble than the 58X, but I think the 58X is an astonishing deal when you compare it to the cost of the 660S. It's really, really close, and you have to be really scrutinizing, and if I listened to them 2 weeks apart, I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Okay, next up on this list is going to be the M1060C with an open modification, buy separate grills or just open them, put your own grills in there, and the LCD2C. Now, I'm saying the M1060C open and not the standard M1060 because I never thought that the M1060 sounded like the LCD series. I think the M1060 sounds nice, but I don't think it has what the LCD has, any of the LCD line, in fact. But I do think that the 2C open has it. And so it's got that crazy kind of straight line bass performance all the way up into sort of the mid-range, where you just get this solid flat line that has that real, kick you in the face kind of bass to it. The vocal presentation on the LCD2C beats the 1060C in my opinion. It's just a little bit more forward and a little bit more lush, but still pretty close. And then both have what I would consider to be a little bit of a recession, very pleasing, and in my opinion, very nice, but they have a little bit of recession in the top end, and it's a little bit more smoother than some other headphones on the market. But between the two, they're very consistent in terms of sound quality. Now, I think what the LCD2C has is slightly wider soundstage. I felt like the soundstage capability of the M1060 was pretty much one-dimensional. Like it had a little bit, but it wasn't a lot, and it was always in the kind of the same direction. It didn't have the dexterity of the LCD2C. And the treble response I felt like was a little bit faster and sharper and more refined on the 2C without being much more forward, and just felt a little bit more lively, whereas the 1060C felt almost a little dull. Almost, it was still detailed, but almost a little bit dull in comparison. So if I could assign like an arbitrary percentage to these, like I assigned the 58X is 95% of the 660S, I would say that the 1060C is about 85% of what the LCD2C is, but it's less than half the cost, coming in at about $330 for the headphone, and then maybe like an extra $20 to $30 for some aftermarket grills, and you're gonna have this great headphone. Okay, so next up on the list we have the Sundara and the Ananda, and I feel like this is basically like a slightly budget version of the Ananda, but it's, in my opinion, better in some ways actually. I think the Ananda edges it out for total sound quality, but there are some other creature comforts that I really like about the Sundara. I really like the Sundara. If you haven't been around for a while, it's a very good headphone. So it's a metal build. The Ananda is not. In my opinion, this is more comfortable because it's a lighter weight build, and I'm not a huge fan of the pads and the fitment of the Ananda. I'm not sure why, because I love the Aria, and that's close to the same build, but it has different headband structure. And I think that makes a world of difference for the Ananda versus the Aria in terms of comfort. And I think that the treble is not quite as forward as it is on the Ananda. And I pretty much consider the treble forwardness on here to be just about perfect for me, but everybody's mileage for that is going to vary a little bit. So what the Ananda does better than the Sundara is that it's basically just like a buffed up version of it. Everything is just a fraction better. You got a little bit better treble response, you got a little bit better mid-range, you got a little bit better staging, you got a little bit better bass, but it's not a significant amount. And this is one of those real close scenarios where I would consider this to be like 90 to 95% of what the Ananda is. I do think the Ananda is better, but not by a whole lot. And I don't think it's worth the $350 to $850 to $1,000, depending on when and where you buy it from, price of the Ananda. I think this is a very, very good deal, and that's why it's one of my top recommendations. Okay, and then we have the last, but probably most controversial one, which is going to be the HD800S. So, part of the reason why this is going to be the most controversial is because the cheaper version is the most expensive. Although I think of the headphones so far I've talked about, this is the most expensive premium headphone of these options. So this is $1,600. And the basic way that one could describe this is extraordinarily detailed, very, very wide soundstage, a fair bit of sharpness in the S and T range, but a very kind of transient, open sound. It's very, very wide sounding. And this has kind of one of the best in class soundstage performances, and maybe even the best soundstage performance that I think I've ever heard. So I have one headphone that I think sounds very similar and is less than half the cost. And I have one very, very cheap headphone that is kind of similar, and then one honorable mention. So the honorable mention here is going to be the DT1990. To be honest with you, this was put in by a friend of mine. It was his recommendation on this part. I don't really think it sounds similar, but I guess some people do. I think the 1990 is a bit more bassier, definitely not as wide, but you do have a fairly wide soundstage on the 1990, and you got a little bit of the sharpness that, and definitely the detail that the HD800S has. Now, the cheapest version that I think you can kind of get a little close to the sound is going to be the SHP 9500s. So I'm actually kind of surprised to see that they actually still sell these things on Amazon. That's kind of crazy. Like, they've been sold for a while. So they're $70, and what you get with them is a very open, very wide sound signature. They have a fair bit of detail for $70. Some people call it grainy, and it is a little bit sharp in the treble response, and it's definitely not a perfect headphone, not by a long shot, but you do get a very wide, very open sound with it. And I've always really liked that headphone. I thought it was a great budget option, and I still think it is today. Now, the headphone that I think really sounds like this and is very good, but still pretty expensive, is the Beyerdynamic T1 Generation number 2. So you can pick this headphone up on Amazon for about $600 to $800, depending on what store you buy it from. And you can shop around a little bit for it. Now, I think that this is probably the closest HD800 sounding headphone that I have heard, other than the standard HD800 to the 800S. Obviously, those are very close. And the way I would kind of describe the sound signature is the HD800 just slightly miniaturized. And I would actually consider it to be about 90% of what the HD800 is capable of, at less than half the cost. And in my opinion, you're not really making any strong sacrifices for the sound over the 800. There's a slight difference in how the sharpness presents itself in the treble range. So the HD800 is more of an S sound. It's got kind of that sharp, slight sibilance feeling to it. Whereas the T1, I would kind of describe as more of like a Z sound or a zing sound to it. It's got a little bit more of almost a metallic quality to the sharpness. So I'm not sure if it happens in a slightly different way or has a slightly different timbre characteristic, but that is one difference between the two. But overall, very, very close. And similar to the 800S being a very detailed headphone for its price category, I feel the same way about the T1 Generation 2. I feel like that has incredible detail performance and just like a really good amount of raw information, especially in the upper mid-range and the treble response for its price range. I think it's a really good headphone, but of a specific sound signature that I think you have to be looking for. So if you've heard the 800, but it's a little bit out of your price range because it is $1,600, which is crazy high, $600, 600 to $800 is still very expensive, but it's a lot easier of a pill to swallow in my opinion. And giving you about 90% of what I would consider the $800 to be worth at half the value, I think is a great proposition if you're into that sound signature. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any recommendations of your own of cheaper versions of expensive headphones, I'd like to see them in the comment section down below. And if I see anything that I definitely missed or I think should be made into a second video, I'll make a second video. All right, guys, until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.